Cool. So round two,
Round
here
two.
in person.
Yeah.
I've just trained with Luke. I survived. I don't even know, like, I didn't know anything about my body, and I thought I trained consciously until I trained with Luke, and he was just like pointing out all of my weak spots and was like, do this. We're doing really weird things. My whole body was just like firing in places that I never even knew before.
Yeah.
Dude, it was great.
Yeah. Just getting out of the strictly bodybuilder physique mentality and focusing on some of the stuff that you might not have been aware of. Just positions of the bones, position of the joints, and then what rotates that stuff.
Yeah.
Especially with your feet cramping up. Like, did you think your feet would cramp up on doing stuff it wasn't supposed to cramp up on?
We were just doing like normal exercise, like the rhythm squats, and like the whole underneath of like my foot.
Yeah.
I was like firing up, and then like my left leg was firing up, and then like on the tops of my feet, I'm just doing like quarter squats right now. Why is my entire like chain just like firing up?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's the thing. Everything's connected. So if you think about what muscles realistically do, they don't just close joints and open joints or move the bones around. They also reposition those things. So if your bones are positioned in the wrong places, those muscles can't act the way they're supposed to. And then you can develop injuries, obviously, from that stuff, which you normally see in just the general population from sitting at a desk all day and all that, and just from not doing anything at all. But then when you get into the bodybuilders, they're so set on their way of lots of sagittal plane movement. Everything's in one position. They don't do anything that requires them to link these chains together. I mean, they do, but they don't prioritize that. And like for you, we talked about your quads. Like you took a whole year off from quads. Why?
Yeah, well, because like my knees kept getting sore, and like my hamstrings were weak, and my glutes were weak, and so I took a whole year off, trained hamstrings as like hard as I could for that year, and then like my knee pain sort of went away. And then today when we were training, I was like, well, you've been training a lot of hamstrings, but you've missed one half of your entire hamstring the whole time. And that's why you're still getting knee problems. Yeah,
it's like, a leg curl is not just a leg curl. A lot of exercise depends on how you rotate the bones and what their specific things are supposed to do. Like, for instance, with your hamstrings, if you look at the outside hamstring, biceps femoris, can cause external rotation of the tibia and the fibula. So one of the things I noticed when I was watching you walk is you walk a little bit duck-footed. So you walk with your toes out a little bit and kind of splayed. It's like, okay, well, let's try this with toes in to see if we can hit the other side of your hamstrings. And then immediately, what happened to your strength when I turned your toes in?
I was so strong. It was like the strongest I've ever been. I was lifting nothing.
Nothing, right?
I was doing nothing, no weight.
Yeah, so it's all good, doing exercise, but sometimes there's the little nuance. It's a little thing, little cherry on top that you can add that completely changes things, changes the way your body develops. And just understanding if you overdevelop the body in one way, it's going to underdevelop somewhere else. So we need to keep that balance at some point.
Which was insane to actually figure that out.
Yeah.
Just through doing like 2 or 3 different things. Like the way you assessed, I was just like, my goodness. That obviously comes from like you and everything that you've learned, like in America, learning with like the greats and all the best people.
All over the world, all
over the world, man. What were some of the best lessons you learned?
Oh man, there's so many. And look, lessons can come in a lot of different forms. So you learn good lessons and you learn bad lessons. And sometimes the bad lessons teaches you to do the opposite. So like Charles Poloquin, for instance, like that was one of my main mentors my entire life. I ended up working for him, was somewhat of kind of like a protege for him when he left Poloquin Group. But you watch what somebody does that makes a lot of sense, and then you watch what they do that doesn't make a lot of sense, or it doesn't make sense to you at that time, and then you find out later that either what they were doing did make sense, you just didn't realize, or you just figure out like, okay, that is not how that works whatsoever. But you get this with everybody, especially in our industry where everything is very extreme. Everything that's a pendulum, it swings from one extreme to the other. No one's in the middle. So like downstairs when I was talking about a lot of postural stuff, not just positions when you're doing an exercise, but also positions when you're standing, sitting, resting postures. Half the industry will tell you posture doesn't matter. There's no perfect posture. Cool. I'll agree with you there. But there is an acceptable and an unacceptable deviation from normal posture, and that's in resting position, but that's also in an active position. So that glute drill I had you do, it's like, okay, this is what happens with your glutes when you extend the lower back, and you see this massive range of motion, but you don't really feel the glutes kick in until the very extreme end, and then you feel your lower back firing well ahead of that. Well, if I want to get into the glutes, it's probably better to go into lumbar flexion and try to pull into a little bit of posterior tilt. It limits your range of motion, but it also allows for the glutes to fire faster without using the lumbar spine. And so that's the kind of stuff that I think is really interesting to start thinking about when you're doing exercises. Sitting on a leg extension, do I go into flexion? Do I go into extension? Well, if your knees are up and your thighs are in flexion, it makes more sense to extend the lower back and use the lower back to pull your glutes into some anterior rotation in order to shorten the quads a little bit. If you pull that into posterior rotation, it's going to have a slightly different effect than if you stick your butt out and try to do a leg extension there. So there's a lot of different tweaks and things that makes one exercise could look the same to anybody watching it, but if you tweak a couple of things, it completely turns the exercise to different focuses, especially like with your VMO. Okay, rotate the feet out. What do? You put the VMO on top of the movement. All of a sudden, you can see and feel the VMO contracting harder because you've made that the dominant muscle.
I think that's one of the best things that, like, you know, what I was really thinking about when we were training today was just in terms of anyone who's ever in aches, pains, injuries, like whatever it is, instead of seeing a chiro, seeing a physio, and just seeing all general health practitioners, it's like, get into the gym and lift weights correctly, which are going to work for you, because over time, like, it's taken time for you to get injured over just like bad patterns for whatever it is. So if you have like a certain plan that's specific to you, over time, you're going to fix everything.
Right.
I've never felt so confident. Like,
that's
after
right.
I trained today, like after we trained and like we went through, like I was lifting nothing and I was sweating like crazy, like pushing as hard as I can, like,
yeah.
I was going nuts. But one thing I was like, I've just found the problems with myself.
Yeah.
And if I just change some stuff over a certain period of time, I can fix all of the little niggles and stuff that I have just through understanding this. And if I progress
100%,
right.
100%. And that's the thing. If your knees hurt, pain is not normal. Like, we don't want to demonize pain because pain's there for a reason. If I didn't feel pain, I wouldn't know there was a problem. So a lot of people will demonize that and say pain is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing unless you ignore it. If you ignore it, and if the check engine lights come on and you just I'll just put some masking tape over that so I don't see it, there's no longer a problem. Eventually something's going to break. So that has to do with conditioning, your metrics, your nutrition, your lifting, everything. If you don't have a good orthopedic profile and you continue to try to work around issues, you're just going to make the issues worse, and you're never going to be able to do the exercise correctly. So it's where like a lot of assessments come into play. We need to have a lot of assessments for hip joint, shoulder joint, neck, spine, all that stuff. And then say, okay, what exercises do you have access to right now? We're going to focus on those exercises so you can train and get jacked and get lean or whatever. But we still need to address these other little things in order to open up access to more exercises. I was a big World of Warcraft guy, like when it first came out. And I still play occasionally. It shows you what kind of fucking nerd I am. But you know, when you look at games like that, where you start out as, I don't know, you're like a gnome mage and you got like a fucking staff and you can't do anything. And you have to go on all these quests and you have to earn the right to get a spell or whatever. And you develop your player over time. I view training the same way. As somebody comes in, they're not really in great shape. What do we need to do? What are the little quests we need to send them on to get them to the point where they have better access, better range of motion, a better canvas to work through, whether that's poor aerobic conditioning, poor anaerobic conditioning, poor overhead flexion, poor extension, poor internal external rotation. We don't want to ignore that stuff. We want to work on that stuff, but we also need to learn how to work on that with big stuff so that they can actually learn how to move better, right? So when you look at bodybuilding, it doesn't matter how you move. It doesn't matter how much weight you lift. It's all about how you look. Are you the most symmetric? Can you hide your weaknesses and show your strengths? Do you have good stage presence? No one's ever going to ask you, hey, what body fat percentage are you? They're never going to ask you how much do you squat. It's irrelevant. But because that stuff's irrelevant, a lot of bodybuilders will ignore aches and pains, and they'll just take ibuprofen and Nurofen, or they'll just put some deep heat on it, and they'll train through that pain, not understanding that in a few years that pain is going to get to a point where those painkillers don't work anymore. That liniment doesn't work anymore. But if we can work around that, find angles you can press in, angles you can pull in, and then we do the rehabby type work to get that joint moving better, mobility is far more important than strength. If you're immobile and strong, you're not good. You're not good. And that may be good for your sport, like powerlifting. Like powerlifting is all about, it's a game of biomechanics, and it's a game of being real fucking tight. But if you can't get into certain positions, your lift's going to suffer. If you have to alter those positions in order to make the lift work and you're pushing through pain, eventually something's going to break, and you're going to go from a 300 kilo deadlift to an 80 kilo deadlift because your back hurts so bad. You're going to go from a 218 kilo bench to a 60 kilo bench because your shoulder's going to hurt so much. But it's crazy that people will ignore this stuff when this stuff is actually fairly easy to fix, as long as you do an intelligent assessment, figure out what you don't have access to, and work on building access to that position.
It's like so simple but so complicated at the same time.
Yeah.
Because you got to spend so much time understanding like what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And I find that just like so impressive, because even just when you're talking about the assessments and the stuff that you're doing, is like it's sort of so sequential that it creates such a big foundation that you're going to get more results in the long run, especially for sustainability and energy and everything like that, and then having to deal with the stress of getting injured and all these other things. That if you're doing it correctly from the start, it's just...
Yeah, and the thing is, if you've been doing it incorrectly for a while, you may have to take a few steps back, but you have to understand that sometimes you got to take a few steps back if you want to take 10 steps forward. If you just take those 10 steps forward, your body eventually is going to make you take 40 steps back, because you're going to get to a point where everything hurts. You need 20 minutes to get your back warmed up when you wake up in the morning. You can't brush your hair because you've got shoulder impingement, like stuff like that. So, but we're in the age of instantaneous results. I want it yesterday. I don't want to work for it. When I got into the industry, and this is over 20 years ago, I started powerlifting, 25 years ago, and then I got into physique sports and strongman and things like that. You would train for years before ever considering jumping into a contest. Like you wouldn't just be like, hey, that looks like fun, I'll go get on stage. You would spend a lot of time developing the musculature and developing the symmetry in order to get on stage. Nowadays, people will go to a show because their friend's on it, and they go, that looks like fun, I'll sign up for a show in 12 weeks. It's like, dude, you've hardly ever lifted. Like they're putting the cart before the horse. It's like, spend your time developing your physique, then decide to jump on stage when it's the right timing, instead of just picking a show just because you think that's going to be fun. And that's what fucks me off, is that, especially with, and nothing against like bikini or any of that stuff. I mean, I started out in men's bikini. Before men's physique was a thing, I was competing in what was the predecessor to that, which was more like, well, no, it was kind of like that. So I don't know if you remember BSN. I don't even know if they're a supplement company anymore.
I remember BSN. They're still
yeah.
around, yeah.
So they would have these modeling contests, right? So you would show up and you would go out in board shorts and jandals or thongs, and for the Americans, flip-flops. And you go out there and you would do your thing, and it was a model search type thing, which I was never built for. I did it because I didn't want to go out there in a banana hammock, because I'm not well endowed enough to be up there with a thimble and strings, right? Which is, it's ridiculous, because I told my buddy that once. He goes, you're suited for bodybuilding. Why don't you just do bodybuilding? I go, man, my dick's not big enough for bodybuilding. And he goes,
banana in your pants, man.
Well, he goes, Luke, ain't nobody's dick big when they're 3% body fat. And I went, you got a point. You got a point. But I did the BSN model search thing, and I looked like the fucking Hulk, because all those guys on stage were like Abercrombie model looking guys. So I was the biggest, ugliest dude up there. So I never did well. And then they brought up men's physique, which I did well there. I was placed top 5 in the shows that I did, and they were massive Texas shows. But going back to bikini, at the amateur level, it's such a low amount for entry, right? You don't really have to do anything. You do a shit ton of cardio, maybe do some body pump class, and you can get on stage. But then when you get to the national level, you get to the pro level, it's a completely different ball game. But there are people that will go out because their friend's doing bikini, and they go, oh, that looks like fun, I'll do that. And then they prepare for a show, and they have zero muscle. They just got a big booty, right? Or they'll go to a IFBB pro who will just thrash the fuck out of them, starve them down, and say, well, what drugs are you willing to take? We can make this work if you're willing to throw enough drugs at it. And it's fucking horrendous. It's a completely different mindset than when I got into the industry, and you'd spend 5 or 6 years building, then you would diet down for a show.
Yeah, which is crazy. And one thing that like has sort of blown my mind recently is just understanding, just like, it's a really hard truth to swallow, and it's very uncomfortable. It's just like the body's sort of so temperamental, and like there's everything that you do has like an action or a consequence somewhere, and it's just so crazy of how just literally specific foods that you eat can like completely like fuck you up.
Yeah.
Or there's certain ways you're training or dieting down and changing and hacking your biology essentially over a certain period of time, like can have crazy effects. Like we're super sensitive to stuff, and like,
100%.
Your stuff around that.
100%. Look, and we can get into that conversation of clean foods versus dirty foods. And people in our industry, they're so narcissistic and pompous, it just makes me want to fucking puke all the time. They're like, and then you got the guys going, there's no such thing as a clean or dirty food. I mean, what's a clean food? You wash it with bleach? It's like, shut the fuck up. It just drives me nuts. That's not helpful. Like, all you guys are doing is bickering with each other, and it's not serving anybody anything. It's all a matter of semantics. We can say clean versus dirty foods. We could say more beneficial versus less beneficial foods. We could say more anti-inflammatory versus inflammatory foods. You can say that however you want, but I mean, I think we'll both agree that a fucking double pepperoni, double cheese pizza is not as clean as, say, fucking chicken, rice, and broccoli, right? It's not as sexy, it's sexier than chicken, rice, and broccoli, but we'll say that one's more beneficial, one's less beneficial, one's cleaner than the other, right? I mean, who gives a shit how we say it? But life is all about consequences, and life is all also about synergistic loading over time. 1 + 1 = 3. If I choose to eat more inflammatory producing foods, I have to understand that I'm going to have a negative consequence, and that's going to delay my progress of getting where I want to be if I'm serious about getting really lean. If I make more good choices, I have a more positive effect. I have an effect of less inflammation. I'm going to feel better. My joints aren't going to hurt. I'm going to sleep better. I'm going to train better. I'm going to sleep better. It's going to be anti-carcinogenic, anti-diabetic. So, not saying that you got to eat clean all the time. You just have to eat the way that you can, control yourself. Like when I diet down, I diet on the standard chicken, rice, broccoli, chicken, and potato, because I know that the minute I have something that's hyper palatable, I can't control myself. And I find that's the truth for most people. But they're looking for ways of, how do I fit a fucking Snickers bar in my program? And if you're real fucking fat, that works, because if you just maintain your calories, eat enough protein, you're good. But if you want to develop a fucking world-class physique and get dick skin lean, or labia lean, however lean that is, you're going to need precision and accuracy, and you're going to want to prioritize anti-inflammatory foods and eat clean, for lack of a better way of saying.
Yeah, I love that. It's just such an important way of just like looking at things, because you're just like very holistic in terms of like.
I fucking hate that word.
I know, but you hate that word.
But it does work. It works. Yeah.
You're looking at everything. What about I'd like to talk about program design. I'd like to get into that, because you guys like specialize on that, big time. In terms of someone like starting, like where would they sort of start, and like why?
Okay, yeah, man, that's a big question to that's a big knot to untangle, right?
Yeah.
It depends where they're coming from, because everybody's so different. Again, with the eating, if I go nutritional program design, if you're say 40% body fat, as long as you control your calories and train, try to sleep well, and eat enough protein, doesn't fucking matter what you do, right? Once you start to get to an average level of leanness, you can get away with a little bit of that, but if you do too much, you're going to end up being fat again. Once you want to get really lean, now it changes, right? So I prefer, even though it doesn't really matter, I prefer the fatter you are, the more I'm going to put you on a lower carb diet. I find that it's easier to maintain your hunger cues. It's much easier to not overeat because you're never eating hyperpalatable foods when you do that, right? As long as you're playing in the realm of caloric intake versus caloric outtake. Once you get to an average level of body fat, I find that transitioning into like a modified low carb or like a zone-based diet, like somewhere around 30 or 40% carbs, if you're training hard, then I find that works really well. And then the leaner you get, the more we move on to a lower fat, higher carbohydrate, and obviously the harder you're training. On the lifting side, I look at everything, every element. If we look at lifting, conditioning, nutrition, and lifestyle, I've got a GPP phase for everything, and I've got an SPP. So
what do they mean?
GPP is general physical preparedness. So basically, if you look at the like sports, athletics, you get an athlete that's coming off of a season. Okay, he's going to be beat up. He's going to have lost strength and muscle. He needs to get reconditioned. He needs to get his strength back up. He needs to prepare for the next season. So you would go through a general physical preparedness phase, which we're not really doing highly specific things for the sport, where it's just all around body conditioning. Then when you start to transfer into your sport, everything starts to get more and more specific toward the sport. Okay, I do this with Gen Pop. So I label those 4 categories: lifting, conditioning, nutrition, and lifestyle. What is your nutritional literacy? If you think that peanuts are a solid source of protein, and if you're eating 60 grams of protein a day, which is not uncommon for women, most women, when I do a nutritional consult, they're doing 40 to 60 grams of protein. I'm like, no, we're going to double that. So if you have very low nutritional literacy, your nutrition is going to be GPP for now. We're not worried about being specific. I just want you to track everything so you get a better understanding of what type of macros and what type of food, and how do you overeat or undereat, so you get a good broad concept of what that should look like. Once you've nailed that, we can move into a specific nutritional program where I'm actually going to start assigning you numbers, and then eventually we start to remove rigidity and start moving more towards flexible dieting. When you do that, the last phase is now we're going to go to more intuitive eating. So now you understand hunger cues, you understand to eat protein at every meal, you understand to eat veggies at every meal, you understand to eat more or less starch depending on how much you're training and how active you are. With the lifting, it's like, okay, do I have somebody who's really muscled and just overweight? Do they have pain? That's going to be a different protocol than if I get somebody who's skinny fat and just needs to put on a ton of muscle. So the skinny fat person might prioritize hypertrophy. If they don't have any pain, we don't have to worry about structural balance. If they're in pain, we're going to try to iron out some of those wrinkles, because it's not going to get better if we keep pushing it. We need to fix what needs to be fixed, get active range of motion in all your joints, while we also put on muscle by working around that stuff. And that's going to be the same with the overweight person, but the overweight person might be doing a lot more metabolic conditioning style work. So trisets, giant sets, agonist supersets like what we did downstairs. They might be doing a lot more cardio at first. The skinny person, if they've got great metrics, they might not be doing much cardio at all. They might just be lifting 5 or 6 days a week or 4 days, whatever they have time for. And then on the lifestyle stuff, same thing. How are you sleeping? Okay, can we get you to bed at, say, 10 p.m.? Okay, can we get a really good solid go to bed time every day and a really good solid wake up every day? Same time. Okay, if you talk to sleep experts, they'll tell you the most important thing that you can do is wake up at the same time every day. And the second most important thing is go to bed at the same time every day. Then you can layer on 7 to 9 hours of restful sleep and working on REM and deep sleep. You can focus on that stuff too. But the most important thing is wake up at the same time, go to bed at the same time, because that controls your circadian rhythm. So if you wake up at 5 a.m. Monday through Friday to go to work, you need to wake up at 5 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday, even though you don't want to. So you move from a level of GPP of let's wake up at the same time every day. If you wake up on Saturday and you don't want to wake up at 5, that's fine. Just get up, do some things, take a nap. Same thing on Sunday. Once you nail that, can I get you to bed at 9:30, asleep by 10? Okay, once they nail that, now we can get more specific on supplementation to increase sleep and sleep habits and sleep routines and things like that. You said you walked 15 to 20,000 steps a day. I don't know how anybody has time for that. The last 4 weeks, I've tried to walk 15,000 steps a day, and I've done it. But, man, that's a fucking pain in the ass, especially when I'm sitting at a desk all day. If I didn't have a treadmill at home in my cinema room, there's no way I would fucking do it. So I would actually rather just say, look, I'm going to get like 8,000 steps, and I'm going to get 7,000 steps worth of light conditioning, because then I can take 70 or 80 minutes of walking, and I can condense that down to 30 or 40 minutes. It saves a lot of time every day, makes it a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
But that's the thing, right? So we move from a level of general to specific, and every client has to be their own N of one. You have to look at every client specifically because they're all going to have different movement impairment issues. They're going to have different strength discrepancies, mobility discrepancies, nutritional literacy. So all that has to fit for each client like a puzzle, which is why you need proper assessments.
Yeah. Crazy, and why you guys have such extensive assessments of all the stuff that you do at Muscle Nerds.
Yeah.
What about for people in terms of like energy? Like, is someone just like, okay, so just super average, but you know, maybe work real hard, got some success, have a business, something like that, and they're like, cool, I just want to like really start to lean in and get really good at focusing, get really good at like thinking and increase my energy and like feel real good about myself. What are some of sort of like some of the mistakes that you find that people make, and then what are some of the like the essential things that you think those people should sort of add into their routine or make a habit?
The big thing is sleep.
Yeah.
You know, people trade sleep for work, and they're doing that because they don't work efficiently. They either don't work efficiently or they do work efficiently and they're greedy and they want to make more money. So they figure, well, if I add 3 more hours of work, then I can make more money. But then it's like, yeah, but you're trading those 3 hours. You could be sleeping, which you have to figure out what's important, what's your priorities, what's important to you, your health and longevity or money. That's a big one. Second one is nutritional deficiencies. Our food sources are not great, especially here in Australia. It's the same thing in America, right? Most of the produce that we make that's the good shit gets shipped overseas. Yeah, that's why when you go to Coles and Woolies and you buy a bag of spinach, you'll buy it and it's like slimy in 3 days.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah, but if you go to a farmer's market and you buy a bag of spinach, 3 months later, that shit's still good, right? Because the quality you get at the farmer's markets is the same quality we ship out, and us Australians, I'm a adopted Australian, almost, we get all what's left over, right? So it's all shit. So I look at food because food is energy, right? You're going to take food and you're going to turn it into usable chemicals that then drive your ability to make energy appropriately. So sleep, look at your food. I would always supplement with a high-powered multivitamin because you are a slave to whatever cofactors you have coming in. So if you don't have certain cofactors, things have to slow down or they have to move sideways. And sometimes when they move sideways or they slow down, that can impair your ability to think. That can impair your ability to feel good. That can increase your perception of fatigue, which is why a lot of people live on coffee because they don't sleep, they don't have good nutrient status. Coffee reduces your perception of fatigue. It doesn't reduce fatigue. It reduces your ability to feel fatigue. And one of the problems with that is it binds to the receptor of the main chemical that makes you sleepy at night. So if you're hammering coffee all day, you never build that deficit of, what do they call it? Sleep. I've just completely lost my train of thought. It's sleep pressure. Right? You have to build sleep pressure. Once you build that sleep pressure and you go to bed, you got melatonin, you've got high levels of adenosine, you're getting sleepy, that allows you to sleep more restfully. But if you're drinking tons of coffee, especially too late, that blocks the action of adenosine so you can't sleep properly. So get rid of the stimulants early in the day. If you need to, nootropics can work. Ginkgo, bacopa, holy basil, those things can work for the brain. There's a specific compounded, it's not really a pharmaceutical, but you have to get it prescribed that you put in your nose and you snort it. And it's like it's RG3 spray, right? So there's a specific extract of ginseng, a little bit of nicotinamide riboside, and some methylated B12. And it goes through the membranes in your nose into your brain. And what that does is it calms down brain inflammation. So a lot of the people who can't think, they're stressed out and they get a lot of brain inflammation. If you can calm that down, it makes you sharper and it actually reduces fatigue, not just the perception of fatigue, and it allows your brain to make energy the way it's supposed to.
So just like in my mind as you were speaking just then, what clicked is essentially if someone was to really optimize their energy and like get really good focus, it's sort of like minimize and remove stress. And as well as increase the amount of cofactors. And what do you mean by cofactors as well?
Well, all of your chemistry runs with cofactors, things that push processes different directions. If you don't have something, then it's hard for an enzyme to work. Like, for instance, you look at B5. Okay, B5 gives you the CoA to make acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA is what drives the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle spitting out electrons. The electrons are in the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain runs energy synthesis. Whoa. So if you don't have, if you're really stressed out, when you get stressed, it tries to ramp metabolism up, but it's only supposed to do that in an acute sense. So when that's running on overdrive all the time, your body will respond by tanking some of those, or you'll chew up cofactors where you can't actually run it that fast. Your body will respond by lowering metabolic rate and lowering some of these essential processes. It's like if you got in your car. If you had a stick shift car and you put it in first gear and you went out on the motorway and you tried to drive 150 kilometers an hour, something would blow. You'd go beyond red line and your engine would blow. You just can't do it. So if you don't have the cofactors, you can't shift in the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, right? So you're always running at red line, and the body's not supposed to do that. Just like a car's not meant to do that, your body's also not meant to do that as well. So we have to take our foot off the gas pedal, pump the brake a little bit, learn how to shift into the next gear.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that are probably listening to this that would be like, oh, I'd probably be in like second or third gear, but it's like, depending on like how to know if your actual body is in first gear, and it's probably a lot more common.
Well, most people have felt like shit for so long, they don't actually know what it feels like to feel relaxed. They're like, no, I'm totally cruisy, I'm relaxed. No, your brain is telling you that. Your brain is lying to you, because from an evolutionary perspective, it's a negative to feel stress and anxiety. So by the time you get really stressed out and you're having panic attacks and anxiety, if you think about an evolutionary perspective, if that was happening to you on the Serengeti, you'd get eaten by a lion, right? So the only difference now is our environment's different. You and I are not likely to get eaten by a lion, sitting at my office. Right? I mean, anything could happen, but the zoo is, 20K away. Maybe a lion got out or some shit. But, we're treating our bodies like there's a danger when there's not really a danger, and we're doing it on purpose because we think that, we need to be more successful, we need to make more money, I need this new cool thing that I don't actually fucking need that's only going to give me 3 weeks of happiness, and I'm going to have buyer's remorse. So you're trading health to have things and to have status, and it's really ridiculous, because if a caveman, you sat down with a caveman would be laughing like, why are you so fucking stressed out? Like as long as you can find food and have a cave and a fire, we good. The caveman would come in here at the gym and be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, oh, I'm lifting weights. Why? To get some activity. Why don't you just go hunt? Well, I'll take you hunting. You walk into Kohl's. Caveman's like, he's standing there with a spear and a loincloth going, what the fuck is this? Well, he'd probably be like, a goony goo goo, because I don't think cavemen spoke English, but
they'll probably try to eat everything in there.
And I'm not using a caveman as being the marker of health, because obviously lifespan wasn't great then, because you would die of a natural death as far as something eating you or some type of disease. So I don't want them to get the wrong idea saying we should live like caveman, be totally paleo. That's not the point. The point is our genetics and our evolution is set up for that hunter-gatherer lifestyle, but now our environment has evolved so much into our modern lifestyle, but our genetics, we don't evolve that fast, right? So we're still hunter-gatherers living in this weird 2021 era of computers and podcasts and Instagram and all this stuff. So it's a completely artificial environment that we're not going to ever be able to evolve as fast as technology. Technology will always evolve much faster than we can. And I remember when I was still a computer programmer, I started computer programming when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And then I went to college for it and decided I didn't want to do it. But back then, this is back in 1996, 97, when I went to university, it was a pretty well accepted idea that the tech industry made a complete massive jump in technology every 18 months. Now it's much faster. Like, think about that. An iPhone comes out every year. New Android phones come out a year. Yeah, it's crazy. And the technology, standard TV, 1080 or what is it? Yeah, 1080. Then 4K, now 8K. Right? It's insane, right? It's that shows you that everything around us in our environment is evolving so much faster than we could ever think. And it's funny because you talk to younger people who, they've grown up with, they've always known social media. Like that wasn't always a thing for me. Computers in your home weren't always a thing to me. We didn't have cell phones. I didn't get my first cell phone until I was like 21 or 22, and I'm now 40, almost 44. But yeah, like think about like planes. We've only had planes a little over 100 years.
Yeah, like literally a little over 100 years.
Yeah.
That's so new.
We started going to space only like 80 years ago. So think about that. Like, it hasn't even been 100 years since we've been going to fucking space. And now we have thousands of satellites in space. And we can if I want to fly somewhere, I can just jump on a plane and fly halfway across the world. Yeah. Like, none of this stuff is normal. But that's our reality.
Yeah, and then we're going to deal with it. Our bodies, all the stress that we come in. I'd love for you to just kind of walk through, because I find this fascinating every time we talk about it. It's sort of like how stress works in the body. So if anyone listening, they're like, okay, so what's like biologically, like what's actually happening like within my body? Okay,
so if we, and just Reader's Digest version of autonomic system and autonomic tone. So you have a few systems here. We'll only talk about the sympathetic system, parasympathetic system. So the parasympathetic system that's kind of your resting and digesting, and repair and restore, right? So that's what we should live in most of the time. The sympathetic system exists for a few different reasons. The main two I'll talk about is, number one, you need sympathetic response in order to break things down to make fuel. So you need some sympathetic response to break fat down, to oxidize it. You need sympathetic response to break sugar down into pyruvate and go into the mitochondria. You need it to break down glycogen. So the sympathetic system is a normal thing to be working at kind of a low level most of the time. Now, again, evolutionary perspective, the sympathetic system can ramp up massively when we're in danger. So if a lion did jump out at you, you'd be like, holy shit, there's a lion. I've got a choice. I can either freeze, I can try to make myself look bigger, I can fight, or I can run. All four of those is shit. You're going to die. But your brain is going to try to do one thing. Like, I can tell you what I would do. I would freeze and shit my pants. That's what I would do, right?
Me too.
Like, holy fuck, there's a fucking lion.
Yeah, goddamn.
Like, but, yeah, it's not a great situation. But, you got fight, flight, freeze, and facade. And people will manifest. You'll see people manifest this stuff in our weird New Age world, where someone will get really stressed out and they'll freeze. And they'll get to a point where for weeks and weeks and weeks they won't do any work. They're just sitting at their computer and they know they want to work. They can't actually get themselves to do anything. You'll see people facade, where they get really irritable and they peacock and they yell at people, and it's like they're trying to start a fight all the time. That's a stress response. It's a fear state in the brain. You'll see people who actually fight. So they'll fight with their partner, they'll fight with their boss, they'll fight with their employees. Or then you'll see people who run. Okay, they do flight. They just avoid. Yeah, they're doing harm avoidance, and a lot of that has to do with, self-medicating with food, booze, hookers, cocaine, whatever. That is a fear avoidance flight response, and that just goes to show how weird our lives and our world is right now, because none of that's a normal response to that thing. But when the sympathetic system goes up massively, it's supposed to be for an acute danger, getting away from danger, and then it goes back down. But now, because of our world, we're always stressed out. We're always feeling judgment from our peers, our colleagues, other people we don't even fucking know on Instagram. We're getting into Instagram, Facebook fights with people. We're stressing about our content that we're putting out. No one's gonna like it. This only got 127 likes instead of 500. So it's just weird. It's basically like psychological warfare. And it revs up that sympathetic state massively, and it keeps you in first gear for too long. And that's where a lot of people's metabolic issues come from. A lot of their issues putting on muscle, a lot of their issues losing fat, a lot of their issues feeling good, a lot of issues with feeling energy without feeling fatigue all the time. When that ramps up massively, a lot of systems start to go haywire. So your immune system goes up for a while, and then it starts creating inflammatory damage. So then your body will shut that down using cortisol. And cortisol will go up to try to control a lot of these systems. But then you go to some trainer who goes, well, your cortisol's too high. We need to take all these cortisol suppressing things. Well, cortisol is actually protecting you at that point. If you reduce the cortisol with pills, you haven't removed the stress that's creating the issue in the first place. So you're actually making things worse. You can make the immune system run haywire. You can make autoimmune worse for people. So yeah, you can get to a position where you're metabolically inflexible because in a stress state, you make faster energy from carbs. Your body wants to use carbs more. So you can start lowering how much fat you're burning at rest, and your carb percentage goes up, which can make it really hard to lose weight unless you're just starving yourself and training all the time. If people would work on that GPP phase, get aerobically conditioned, work on stress management, sleep more, a lot of cases train less, get your food in order, get on the level, and now increase exercise, increase food, increase exercise, increase food. Okay, then you can always reduce food if you want to go down. So there's a big, there's not really a step 1 through step 10 process. It's more like a flow chart. Yes, go this way. No, go this way. Yes, go this way. No, go this way. But a lot of people, man, stress is the big one. I remember I used to get in arguments with Dr. James Laval, who's one of my mentors. I was still convinced insulin resistance is the devil and everyone's fucked because of insulin resistance. He goes, they're all fucked because of chronic stress. And I went, no, you're wrong. And now I realize he was right. The chronic stress is causing the insulin resistance. So if I just take pills to manage the insulin resistance and I don't take care of the stress, I'm only putting a Band-Aid over a bullet hole. I'm never actually fixing the problem.
So how do you know if you have insulin resistance? How do you know if any of these
Well, there are things you can do. You can do oral glucose tolerance test. You can do postprandial glucose tolerance test. I'll tell you, the more body fat you have, the more likely you are. The higher your waist to hip ratio is, the more likely you are. If you have high triglycerides and dyslipidemia on your bloods, you probably have some metabolic resistance. If you crave carbs all the time and they make you feel better, like almost like a drug when you eat them, that's probably not a great thing, because that can be poor insulin management, hyperinsulinemia, putting carbs where they're not supposed to go, whatever, and not putting them where they're supposed to go. Most people who are lean and work out probably don't have insulin resistance. If you get well trained, well conditioned, the odds you have insulin resistance are really poor unless you've got some type of pathology like a type 1 diabetes, right? But that's the key, right? I need to build muscle, get the muscle working effectively, build mitochondria, get that working effectively, work on building oxygen transport, like getting checked for anemia, looking at your red blood cell count. Do you have enough hemoglobin red blood cells? Are you working on aerobic activity and breathing better? Are you hyperventilating? That's not good. Are you sleeping well? Do you have sleep apnea? It's a lot of things you need to look at. But the more these bad boxes that you tick, the more likely you're going to have insulin resistance. So if you have sleep apnea, probably going to have insulin resistance. Even if you train. I've got a powerlifter friend that I'm helping. His fasting insulin was 12, and that was on insulin medication.
Is that like, where's that? Is that high or low on the scale?
Fucking horrendous.
Yeah, low or
high?
High. Okay.
Horrendous.
What's a good number?
I mean, if you look at above, I got to take American freedom units and turn them into Australian units.
Yeah, very cool.
So if you look at 100 in America, okay, once you get beyond that, they start classifying you as borderline diabetic. So you divide that by 18. So that's at, about a 5.6 or so.
Okay.
So
12 is double the amount.
Yeah. So once you get 100 or a little higher, they're going to say, well, you're borderline pre-diabetic. Once you start getting close to about like 7.8, they're going to classify as diabetic, and they're going to probably prescribe you some anti-diabetic drugs. He was at 12.
So that's like.
So he was at 216 in freedom units, which is horrendous.
Yeah. So that's sort of like, essentially he's diabetic, but he's actually not diabetic. But he's just having the symptoms of him because he's so insulin resistant.
Yeah, well, and he's becoming you got to keep in mind, this is a high level powerlifter, one of the strongest dudes in Australia. You're not going to get that big and that strong. You're not going to deadlift and squat 400 kilos and bench 220 without drugs. It ain't going to happen. I'm sorry. If you're like Hap Thor, yeah, cool. You could probably do without drugs because you fucking weigh like 400 fucking kilos. But that's probably going to happen. But if you're a guy sitting around 110 and you're deadlifting, squatting almost 4 times your body weight, yeah, you're gonna you got there because you're on drugs. There's no other way to compete at a high level. So I hate to crush anybody's hopes, but you can do really well. You can get really strong, but if you want to get that strong, you're gonna have to take a heap shit of drugs. So you're talking like growth hormone, testosterone, most of the usual suspects, but then looking at also insulin to manage some of the glucose from the growth hormone, right? So then when we started talking about what we're gonna do here, blood pressure was super high, 150 over like 90 to 100, resting heart rate like 80 something. Like, okay, we're gonna have to do some conditioning. So we got him doing bike and then echo bike, more steps, stuff like that. I don't write his weightlifting stuff. Another guy does, but we all got on a call and said, okay, what do we do? Let's do more metabolic work. So now he's doing more brotastic bodybuilder stuff because there's no meets coming. So it's great. This is a great time for him to get his shit together. And so now we had his blood pressure below 130 over 70, no more blood pressure medication.
Whoa.
We had resting heart rate still fairly high, but it's always been high. So that possibly could be a genetic issue. But now it's like in the 70s. So better than in the 80s, not great, but blood pressure, much better. No more 12 fasting blood sugars. Now we're sitting at like in the 5s, which is great.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic, yeah. And it was just a lot of, way too much sodium, too many sauces and sodiums. Let's cut that out. Let's add in some more potassium by eating more plant foods and more fruit especially. And now we're gonna do some basic conditioning, and then I forced him to get an Xbox because loves video games, but he was playing them on his phone. And the problem with that is when do you think he's likely to be playing a lot of those?
At nighttime. At
nighttime in bed. Now, if he's on the Xbox, great, he can play and then go to bed. But when you look at like good bedtime rituals, there's only a few things you should be doing in bed: fucking and sleeping, and maybe reading. You should keep the electronics out of the bedroom. So get a book, whatever. Use the bed for what it's intended to do, so that you don't train your brain to expect to be doing other things like playing video games or doing work in bed and things like that. So all of that stuff, you have to take a multifaceted approach of how do we create a strategy that this person can actually do, and what's the 20% of things that we can do that's going to get 80% of the results, and that's what we did.
It's so funny you said that. I'm almost at this point where I've committed to have been saying this to myself for like the past 3 weeks, and it's like, before you go to bed, leave your phone in charge downstairs, like before you go up and go to bed. And I'm like, after this conversation, like, I'm doing it tonight. It's done. I'm doing it the first night tonight. I'm definitely doing it because I just understand.
100%. And look, there's a lot of people. I don't want to get on the hippie woo shit, but there are people who do have a sensitivity to electromagnetic radiation. Not everybody, but some people do have a sensitivity that can fuck your sleep up. So I remember a girl I dated long ago. She had been tested by, I don't know who tested her, but it was pretty legit. And they said, you have a sensitivity to this. And when we first started dating, she was like, man, I just sleep so bad. I go, well, where do you put your phone? Because you already said that you've got this issue with EMF radiation. Well, I keep it beside my bed. I go, well, why do you keep it there? That's my alarm. Well, why don't you just put it on the other side of the room or in the bathroom? It'll still wake you up. She did that, no problem sleeping again.
Wow.
Then years later, when we were living together, her parents had bought us a big screen TV. We were sleeping perfectly fine. Then all of a sudden, she can't sleep. And I'm like, why aren't you sleeping? Then I realized the big screen TV was on the opposite side where we had our heads in bed. So I started unplugging at night. She started sleeping well, and she went, well, I'm sleeping well now. I don't understand. I go, yeah, it's because I keep unplugging the TV, because basically it's like putting your head in a microwave. Yeah, so
it's insane.
Yeah, it's nuts.
It's insane. I'd like to talk about maybe some, for people who are listening, some tools that people could use. It's sort of just like if we had a goodie bag of things that you'd really encourage people to do, who say are a little bit of high stress, they're super motivated, they're driven, they want a success, they want to find their purpose, they want to do these things, but they may be feeling a little anxious, a little depressed, you know what I mean? And like could be going through like, how am I actually going to get there? Because, you know, I've built foundations elsewhere, but haven't exactly built a foundation of myself yet.
Yeah.
So what would be like for you if you were to give someone like a little goodie bag of just like things to do to try? Tools.
You know, one thing I would do is I'd make everybody get a blood pressure monitor, and I would have them do it multiple times a day, especially towards the evening, because in the late afternoon, your blood pressure is the highest it is all day. So you'll have people that test really good in the morning, 6 p.m., blood pressure is skyrocketed. So you want to take the metric at the worst possible time, or when it's the highest, and try to bring that down, because that's going to help, with your brain, because if you have high blood pressure, you're going to get issues with vascular hypertension, which means that because your blood flow isn't good, you're having a hard time pushing blood to the brain. If you can't push blood to the brain, you can't get oxygen into the brain effectively, which means you can't make energy effectively, and you're going to start plaquing in your brain, and you're going to get early onset dementia or Alzheimer's. So I would be blood pressure. Most blood pressure cuffs will do heart rate as well. Try to get your blood pressure below 120/80 all the fucking time, right? Try to get your heart rate as low as you can. I think below 62 is a good place to start. Somewhere in the 50s is good. If you can get it in the high 40s, that's excellent. I can tell you right now, you get it there, you're going to be relaxed all the time. Nothing's going to bother you. You're not going to be irritated, and you're going to have tons of energy. One thing I would do as well is get a white noise machine for your sleep. So either get a white noise machine or put an app on your phone. Put your phone on the other side of the room and play that white noise. I find that helps, or listening to books on tape like Audible. So every night I'll put a timer 30 minutes on Audible, and I'll put on a book.
I didn't even know you could do timers on Audible. That's like the best thing ever.
Yeah, you can do timers, and I'll do that, and I'm out within 5 minutes.
Yeah, I do the same.
Yeah.
I've been listening to Audible when I go to sleep at the moment, and I'm out.
That, or like the white noise works. Like I just bought an air purifier because I've been waking up with a lot of phlegm. And I think it's because we've got a lot of dogs. And so a lot of dogs, an air conditioner that runs pretty much full time because I'm a bit hyperthermic. I need it to be cold. There's going to be a lot of dust, animal dander, stuff like that. So I put it on turbo, and it simulates a white noise machine while also cleaning the air. I haven't had any coughing or sneezing or hacking up in the last few days since I put it in the room. Another thing, vitamin D is a big one. Labs. Get your labs done. And don't go to the doctor for this. Go somewhere like imedical.com.au and order the test you want. I prefer the Sports BB4 Plus. That gives you, especially for guys, that gives you all the stuff you need to know. There's a couple of things you could add in there, and a colleague of mine told me about this, Dave Lee. He was like, dude, get the Sports BB4 Plus, then you don't have to go through and pick everything you want because it has almost everything. You might add vitamin D to that, maybe some progesterone, maybe growth hormone. There's some things you could add to it to make it more comprehensive. It's like $300 out of pocket. Get your bloods done every 3 months. If your bloods are fucked up, call me. Let's talk about it. I'll fix your shit.
Yeah, I was gonna say
for a price.
Just call you anyway, because a lot of people understand that. Oh, I get bloods, and then what the hell's going on here? But
yeah, but you go to the doctor, and it's like, I feel like I've got no energy. I've been searching on Google, and it says I may have anemia, and the doctor goes, okay, well let's look for anemia. They just run ferritin. That does not show you anemia. You need to run a full iron study, and you need to run a CBC. Ferritin is massively influenced by oxidative stress and inflammation. So you could have a normal ferritin and have fuck all usable iron in your body. You could have that, and then you could have shit hemoglobin and red blood cells. No wonder you don't have any fucking energy. No wonder you're gassed all the time. You're not getting enough oxygen to the muscles because you can't transport it correctly. So labs, if vitamin D, everyone in Australia is deficient. I think I've seen maybe one proper vitamin D amount on all the labs I've ever seen in Australia.
That's heaps. You've done so many labs.
It's heaps.
So many labs.
And the ranges here are too low. They're too low. They need to be raised a little bit. But if you do labs, you see your vitamin D is low, then there's
Sun your balls.
What's that?
Sun your balls.
Sun your balls. Sun your butthole. Do the butthole sunning. But no, you can put, there's an app you can put on your phone called D-Minder, and it looks at the UV index, and it tells you at what point of the day is solar noon. Go out at solar noon. Go out in as little clothing as you can without getting arrested, and then lay in the sun, and you can hit a timer on it, and it'll tell you how much vitamin D you've made in that amount of time. It'll project it. If you know your vitamin D numbers, it'll add it to that. And then if you're taking any vitamin D supplementation, which I highly recommend, it'll add that to it. So you can actually chart and do a pretty rough ballpark of where your vitamin D is, and then you can go test it again and see how close it is. But
Man, you would blow so many people's minds just then, just for the fact that you're telling people to go out at noon in Australian sun and wear nothing, because everyone's going to be like, I'm going to get skin cancer and die. But it's like, you need the vitamin D.
You do. You need the radiation to convert the D. That came out wrong, but
to convert get the D, what are we doing?
but like it's dose makes the poison. So like either go out at solar noon for a very short period of time. What's nice about that timer is it'll actually beep. So it has a countdown on it. It'll tell you how much time you can be in the sun before you're going to start burning. So it gets you out of the sun before you can create a lot of skin damage. But again, I'm not telling anybody to go out at solar noon. I'm all about efficiency. So if I go out at solar noon and I only have to be out there for say like 8 minutes per side in order to get my D, great. If I'm scared of the sun and I want to go out at 9 o'clock in the morning when the UV index is lower, or if I want to go out at like 4 or 5 p.m. when the UVI is lower, I just have to understand I'm going to have to be in the sun longer, right?
I like the quick D.
The quick D. You just want the tip, not the shaft.
Yeah.
But so many people are scared of the sun. And I just got a skin check, and Zoe made me go, and the guy's trying to talk to me about this stuff, and I'm just like, So I don't try to argue with doctors. But that's your specialty. But they're going to be talking about what they learned and what their vitamin D organization is saying, or what their medical association is saying. But I go to the experts like vitamindcouncil.org, and what are they saying? Because they're the specialists who are actually researching this stuff. And I think that if more people get their vitamin D level up, they wouldn't have to worry about cancer, as much melanoma and cancer, as long as they were cautious in the sun, but not fearful of the sun. Those are two different things. I can be cautious about the sun without being fucking scared shitless of the sun. And being scared shitless of the sun is doing you a disservice, because there's a vitamin D receptor on every single cell of your body. If you're deficient in vitamin D, you're not optimized. If your thyroid is fucked, the thyroid receptor will not work without vitamin D and vitamin A. If you're a vegan, you're double fucked, because you're not getting any usable vitamin A out of plants. You have to convert that, and God forbid you have a BCO1, BCO2 polymorphism, because then you've got a reduced ability to turn beta-carotene into vitamin A. So you better either if you're not going to eat animals and get vitamin A, then great, then take a vitamin A supplement, because you need that for your immune system, your thyroid, your eyeballs, everything.
Dude, that's just insane. Like, and in terms of like just recapping on the goodie bag, there was blood pressure cuff.
Blood pressure cuff.
Get your labs done.
Get your labs done.
Get the D.
Get something to remind you to get plenty of D. And then know what I would say too, like go to a Muscle Nerds coach and get some proper assessments done. Somebody's done my program design, and focus on restoring your movement, because that is way more important. Like, I love bodybuilding. I'm a meathead at heart. I love bodybuilding, always have, powerlifting, strongman, all that stuff. But as you age, especially you guys in your 20s, you're going to massively regret it if you focus on strength and you don't keep mobility in mind, because once you lose mobility and you start getting joint damage, it's a bitch to rectify, especially as you get older. And no one's going to give a shit when you're 70 years old how much you used to squat and deadlift. If you're at the coffee shop and you see some young meathead come in and you go, I used to be your size when I was your age, and then you stand up and you're all fucking crippled over and hobbled, and you're pushing your little chair around. I gotta go get my denture shit at Kohl's. That guy's gonna look at you and go, you fucking crazy old man. You never fucking squatted that much or deadlift that much. And it's like, yeah.
Essentially what happened to Ronnie Coleman, right?
It's super common. Like, so I went to Kohl's the other day and I saw these 3 old dudes sitting there, and they're always there, like every day. That's their thing. And they're all crippled over, and they're all pushing their little chairs. You know those little, it's like a quad chair thing, and then you can set it and turn around and get in. One guy had his little rascal thing, his little buggy thing he drives around with an Australian flag off the back, like an Australian first sticker and shit on the back. And some fishing pole holders, which I thought was pretty cool. But like, I look at those guys and I go, man, I'm so glad that I never tried to train through injury. I tried to fix it first, because I see all the time in bodybuilding, powerlifting, jiu-jitsu, guys they get addicted to the training, and that's the only thing they fucking have in their life. So they will train even though they're in massive amounts of pain, and they'll train until they have a meniscus injury, an ACL injury, they have a shoulder dislocation, a shoulder separation. They'll do this stuff until their body forces them to quit, right? So that's not going to get better as you age, because once you start losing landscape to move a joint, you're going to have to work really hard to get that back. It's much better to be preventive against that than to try to fix it after the fact, which is why I've never had a major injury. I've had some back issues, but that's probably too much sitting at a desk and then going and trying to train hard without working into lengthened ranges of motion. But I've never had a major lifting injury. I've never had a major sporting injury. Even doing in jiu-jitsu competitions, even doing strongman competitions, all that stuff, because I've always been cautious enough to not train through pain, but to actually say, okay, what is fucked? What do I need to fix? Okay, I'm going to work around it as much as I can, but I still got to address this deficiency that I have.
So in terms of people like listening, if they're like, oh man, like this is happening, but well, this is some stuff going on in my body, and man, I absolutely do not want to end up like I don't want to end up like that guy. It's like, well, what do I do? Is that just like figuring out in terms of, because obviously you can just see you to have some of the assessments, see Muscle Nerds coach, but in terms of just for people listening who may not, it's like, is that just training underweight to strengthen to lengthen in your muscles essentially?
Well,
is that, or
well, no, I mean that's kind of the thing, right? You have physios on one side saying you need to do all these dinky little fucking rehab exercises, and you got powerlifters going, just put less weight on the bar, and it's like, okay, those are great strategies. They're also massively incomplete. Okay, so you can't stretch. Stretching doesn't work. Just lift. Well, once you stop stretching, you lose flexibility. Cool. I can also say, well, squatting doesn't work because once you stop squatting, you lose strength. Doesn't make any fucking sense. It's like, stop throwing fucking tools away when those tools are great in certain situations. So if I need to stretch to get into position, great. I'm going to keep stretching until I can get in that position of no pain. And then once I can get there with no pain, I can pull the stretching out. So anybody can look up active range of motion tests. You can look online and look AROM, active range of motion test, and say, okay, if I think about shoulder flexion, okay, I need to be able to keep my torso in the same spot, keep my elbow straight, and I need to be able to get at least, I would say, I like 180 degrees or more. If you can get to 165, 170, you're probably pretty good. But if you go like this and you get stuck, okay, how the fuck are you going to overhead press? The only way you're going to do that is you got to compensate. You got to extend the lower back, and
my housemate does that.
You got to work around it, right? It makes a much better situation to say, well, I'll do landmine presses for a while because I've got control of that range of motion, while I also stretch out the tissue to allow me to get here, and also strengthen their antagonist to be able to pull my arm into position, because you have muscles that are working they're equal and opposite reactions across a joint. One muscle, if it's overly hypertonic, well, let's create either longer tissue, biological tissue chains, or fix the neural response. Then let's work on the other side to improve its neural response and tighten it up so that it repositions my joint. So now my joint gets full range of motion. So if I can't get there, how the fuck are you going to do pull-ups? You going to do pull-ups from here? Like, you need to be able to get here. So they'll arch back and they'll do anything they can to get in that position, but it's not a great position to do that from. It's a great exercise, but you should be able to do that. You should be able to go here and just pull yourself up and come down without having to alter the position to try to create room in the joint. Same thing with extension. If you can't extend your arm to, say, 60 degrees, how the fuck are you going to do deep dips? And then you'll see people do dips. They'll go, instead of going down like this, they'll go, well, why? And they'll go, my traps are taking over. They're taking over because they're trying to move these bones out of the way of this bone. So you shouldn't have to dip and go like this or shorten the dip. You should be able to keep the shoulders down and allow them to rotate naturally into extension. But if you can't access that, you have absolutely no license to be there until you rectify that.
Man, so like, bit of a weird question. So for people who are like a bit banged up and like sort of like, once they're completely banged up, let's just say they've just got a couple of things and a couple of range of motion issues because they've been going to the gym but they haven't had any like really in-depth sort of high level training to understand stuff. It's like, well, why not just stay there?
What do you mean? Why not stay
there where it's just a little bit shit?
I mean, why would you want to be shit? Yeah, why would you want to be shit? Like, there are things you can do to work around. Like, let's say the bench press. Somebody doesn't have a problem benching here, but they can't get into full shoulder extension. Okay? Well, I can do partial presses off pins while I also stretch this stuff out and get the back of the shoulder stronger to pull that into extension. Then all of a sudden I go down and I can go a couple more inches without any pain. Well, now I can pin press from there, keep working on this, keep doing that, improve internal external rotation. All of a sudden they can press again. They don't have to modify it. They can actually do the workout. But people are so scared to do this because, well, if I improve range of motion, I'm going to get weaker. Well, if you get injured, you're going to get weaker. So
yeah.
Would you rather take a few steps back to improve your movement and then build strength back up, or would you rather get a fucking shoulder separation or a labral issue or something like that, or a rotator cuff issue? Would you rather do that and now not be able to train for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and also maybe have to have surgery?
It's so funny. It comes back to like a circle moment of us when like we were training today in the gym with understanding everything. Like for me, for understanding like just the way my legs are moving, because I've had like this knee injury since I was 21 and I'm 29 next month. So it's always been there. But after we went everything and like moved some toes out, moved my knees out, did certain exercises. Afterwards, like I was noticing when I was like walking downstairs and walking back up here, it felt like as if I took my pants off and I was free with my legs. I was like, whoa, just with that small amount of glute work and stuff and firing places that haven't been fired before in like the weak areas. And now it's like, I feel like prior to that session, I was tight, man. And like, I didn't notice that I was as tight as what I thought I was. And there wasn't as much like, cause I've just been living with it.
Yeah.
And like after that, I was like, man, I could be so much better. I could be lifting so much heavier. I could be like performing so much better, which isn't just going to have the effect of, I can like train better. That's literally going to prevent all the pain stuff happening in my head. That's going to make me feel more confident. I'm going to feel more alive when I'm in the gym. I'm going to feel more alive outside of the gym because I've achieved something well, which is then going to like play on into my work. And the stuff that I do, and I'm going to feel better about all those things because I'm sending myself all these positive signals instead of just
100%. 100%. And the thing is, like, a lot of guys will shorten the range to ego lift and lift more weight. It's like, if you go longer range, you're going to have to lighten the weight up, and you don't have to do that all the time. But if you're doing another key thing I learned from Charles Poloquin, if you're doing partial range of motion stuff, you need to finish it with longer range of motion stuff. So. Let's say you're doing inertia presses. So you're in the squat rack, you've got the bar set on the pins, and you're squatting like quarter reps or half squats. There's nothing at all wrong with that, but after that A set, you may consider doing 2 or 3 sets of deep squats to keep everything nice and tidy, or split squats, keep everything nice and tidy. So, but a lot of people they'll do a lot of cheating reps and they'll do a lot of half reps because they're ego lifting for the chick that's watching them or the dude that's watching them or whatever, and they don't realize you're actually going to make things worse and you're fucking up the function of how those muscles control those joints, and you're gonna fucking pay for it eventually, and you're probably gonna pay for it doing something stupid. I'll give you the opposite side of that too. I was dealing with a guy who had a shoulder dislocation in jiu-jitsu a few weeks ago. He took it extreme the other way. He was going too long a range of motion and didn't have strength or control in those ranges of motion. So he was trying to do flies and get way back into horizontal abduction, but he wasn't using any weight. He was just stretching into that position. But you need to be able to come down there and do reps. So even like 1 1/4 reps at the bottom to improve strength in that range of motion to improve stability. He was in a scramble. He put his arm out to stand up, popped his shoulder out of place, had to pop it back in. So that stuff works on both sides. Like, you can do way too much contraction work and you can do way too much mobility work. The key is, if you're going to get more mobile, you want to strengthen that range too. So it's not just about stretching, it's also about long range weighted mobility movements in order to now improve how much strength and stability you have and how much control of that joint and those muscles you have in that new range of motion. If I improve my range of motion by 15 to 20 degrees, my body doesn't have strength in that. It can access it, but it doesn't have any stability or control. So now I need to work on weighted mobility movements like split squats, pullovers, dumbbell flies. That's the stuff that's going to allow you to train that new range of motion so you can make your joints bulletproof.
Isn't that a goal? Bulletproof joints, especially. Like, I try to take longevity, sustainability into, like, especially, I think when I turned about, it was like 24, I was like, man, I just want to live as long and just be crushing, like, having this much fun for the rest of my life because it's so good. But I think it's real funny how you mentioned, when we're just talking about things in the goodie bag, with the blood pressure, the labs, there was
blood pressure labs, vitamin D app.
Vitamin D, get the D, and then you went straight into, like, exercising. And I think that's like so too.
It's the goodie bag.
Yeah, right. In terms of just, like, importance, just for the people who know who are on and off with their training and not sort of doing something, like, how important is movement? I'm not sure if you've got, like, all the science or whatever behind it, but how important is movement in terms of just, like, health, mood, everything else, fighting anxiety, depression, being focused, energy?
Well, I'll tell you the quote that I love that Tom Myers told me when I went to a cadaver course. I think I've got my certificate back there. I cut up dead bodies for 5 days in Colorado. Yeah. So
what
Tom,
was that like? Just quickly, sorry.
It was weird. It was weird. The first 2 days, you're like, ooh, God, Jesus, that's somebody's dad, brother, uncle, husband, whatever. And then once their face is off, then it's like, it's pretty easy. But you get some, you get some really weird thoughts. Yeah. So I was working on somebody's quad, and it's crazy too, because once you cut the skin, you reflect it back, and then you've got the fascia. You've got the fascia profunda.
The sock that the muscle's in.
Right? So you've got fascia that runs through everything, but you also have fascia that basically ties certain muscle groupings together, and then you've got one that ties everything together. So you undo that first one that's kind of like the leotard of the body, and once you pull that off, it's funny because there's no nervous system to hold the muscles, so the muscles just flop out.
Whoa!
Because there's no muscle tone.
Ooh.
So the minute you cut that fascia and reflect it back, all the muscles just kind of flop because the muscles are only attached to the bone at each side, not in the middle, so they just slide off. So you reach down, you're holding somebody's vastus intermedius, and you're like, ugh. And it's weird because you start looking at some of it, and you're like, about day 3, you're like, man, that looks a bit like flank steak. That looks like a little bit of.
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, you go. That looks about like a little bit of skirt steak. I could make fajitas out of that. And then you go, no. So then we went to a steakhouse that night because I was like, ugh. But I didn't want to get caught like carrying out somebody's fucking VMO. You get some fucking weird thoughts.
So funny because I think I'd be thinking that exact same shit.
I think everybody was. Because I remember, like, my buddy Dr. Mike T. Nelson, we were staying together, so we went and we had lodging together, and I was looking at it, and he's looking at it, and we look at each other, and I go, "Do you want to get steak tonight?" He goes, "Yeah, let's go get steak and some beers." So I went, okay. So he was probably thinking the same thing. But what Tom said to us in that class, he said, movement is another macronutrient. And I was like, that's the one, man. That's the fucking quote. Like, he didn't say strength training. He said movement, whether that's strength training, weight and mobility, yoga, Pilates, whatever your movement is, that's what you want to do. But movement, keep in mind, movement is range of motion and it's strength, right? So improving elasticity of a muscle, improving the range of motion of a joint, improving the muscle tone, improving the muscle strength. That stuff is all massively important. And if you look at that, carbs, proteins, and fats, you need these things, right? You need these things every day. Well, if movement is another macronutrient, guess what? You need that. You need that every day, right? Here's the thing. If you don't get water every day, what's going to happen in a few days?
Oh, man. So I did a little bit of research on this. Basically, your fascia is going to dehydrate.
Well, all I want you to say is you're going to die.
You're going to freaking die, I was going to say. Your body's going to...
If you don't get food, if you don't get your macros and enough energy for a few weeks, what's going to happen?
You're going to die.
Eventually, you're going to die. You know, it might be 5 or 6 weeks later. But the same thing with the movement. If you don't move, you're going to die. You're just going to die. It takes a longer time.
Slower. I just see so
It's
many...
slower, but your muscles are going to atrophy. You're going to get sarcopenia. You're going to reduce reactive force. You're going to reduce your ability to stop when you fall, and that's what kills a lot of old people. They fall, they break their hip, they end up in the hospital, and they die of other complications like pneumonia. So you got to get your macros in every day. That's why movement's important. And then, you know, I'm not telling people that they have to lift weights. I prefer lifting weights, doing your conditioning. And lifting weights can mean a lot of different things. That can mean weight and mobility, that can mean powerlifting, whatever. That can be calisthenics, that can be, you know, the monkey ninja shit that the movement guys do, which I think they've got it figured out better than anybody. Yeah, if you look at the movement guys, are they massively strong? No. You know, a lot of them are real fucking weak when you compare them to other things. But people like Ido Partel, who could, you know, double body weight front squat and can move, he has an above average level of strength, and he can move. Like, I think that's the perfect blend, is being that guy who can get through all your range of motion, can do German hangs, can do all this other stuff, but he can also squat a decent enough amount of weight for what he wants to get out of life. That doesn't mean he needs to squat double body weight. If he squats, say, 1.5 times body weight, that's a good, decent base of strength. He only needs to improve that if there's a reason why. Like, why do you want to squat 3 times your body weight? Like, are you planning on fucking going and lifting people's cars off of them and a fucking, you know, out of a car wreck? Or why do you want to deadlift and squat that much? You need to justify why. You want to do it just because I think it would be cool. Great, that's a valid reason. But don't tell everybody you train that they need to be that strong, because that's your standard, not their standard. Right? I'm all about getting strong, but we have to be realistic that you don't need to be that strong for life. You need to be strong enough for the things you want to do, and you need to be able to move enough and get into positions enough for what you want to do. Like,
so this is like a little personal question, because when you've learned like all of this, like I find you so impressive, and I tell you all the time.
Thanks, man.
I'm just like, my goodness, there's so much. But like, you do all of this like to really optimize, and you help like a lot of people. It's like, why do you care so much? Like, you care so much, and like you go through and like it's so great to see, and thanks for doing it. So.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I don't know, man. I don't know why. I guess I feel like you need to have a life's purpose, and that purpose needs to be, you know, if you can make money doing that, which I do, it's not great, but it makes I stay happy. Like they say, you find something you love doing, you'll never work another day again. I work my ass off. That's a fucking lie. But I work my ass off because I do care. Because honestly, I could make a shit ton more money doing a lot of it. I go back in computer programming and network and make 3 times what I'm making right now. But you know, I've done this my entire life, and I actually decided I was gonna quit. I was gonna quit a couple of years ago. I went, I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of everybody arguing. I'm tired of everybody being complete fucking cunts to each other. Fuck this industry. Fuck everybody. And Zoe goes, yeah, but if you quit, they win. And she knows how competitive I am. I'm like, you're right. I can't let them win. Fuck these guys. So I decided to stay in the industry and just say, look, man, let's just talk about real shit and how this shit works. But I don't know, man. I guess I can do this for the rest of my life. Like, I can always lecture as long as I keep my brain healthy. Which most of the stuff I take for my personal supplementation stack is all cardiovascular health and brain, because I'm using it's my retirement plan. I'm using that to make sure I can live a long time, even if my body breaks down. If my cardiovascular system works well, my kidneys works well, my brain works well, I could be 90-something years old. I could be Dr. Bruce Ames. This dude's in his 90s.
What? I've seen his stuff.
He's the father of triage theory, very prominent biochemist. He's still actively doing research. He's like 92 or 93. So that's what I'm looking at. Like, when I'm that age, I want to be, boom, I want to be still doing things, still taking courses, still making courses. You know, it's just, it's my passion, you know, it really is. And I can't think of anything else I'd rather be doing than this.
I love it.
Yeah.
And just like real quickly, you mentioned stuff that you're taking for brain and cardiovascular health. I'd love to know what you're taking.
I do
so
take. Okay.
Some of that.
Number one, again, cardiovascular system is massively tied into brain health. Yeah. So before you're taking nootropics and all this stuff, get your blood pressure regulated, get your aerobic conditioning up, get your VO2 max up, lactate threshold, get all that stuff sorted. Get in really fucking phenomenal shape first. But I take aged garlic extract for blood pressure. And keep in mind, too, I'm on ADD medication. So that raises blood pressure and heart rate. So I take things to be prophylactic against that. I take hawthorn, which is good for cardiovascular system. I take bergamot, which is good for metabolic syndrome, and lowers inflammation, lowers non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, all that stuff. For my brain, I take ginkgo, which tends to work really well for guys and girls that are above, like, say, 40. That it improves blood flow to the brain. It's got some antioxidant qualities, things like that. And bacopa, which also improves blood flow to the brain as well. And it also, a lot of these things will prevent the atrophying of the hippocampus, which stress tends to reduce that, which tends to lower your ability to process short-term memory into long-term memory. And also, interestingly enough, in the case of like massive trauma, like early childhood trauma or adult trauma, if you're massively stressed out and you're going through traumatic stuff, that can atrophy your hippocampus, which can keep bad events in the front part of your brain where you can't process them. So that can lead to self-sabotage. That can lead to addictive tendencies, impulse control, and things like that. So ginkgo, for me, ginkgo and bacopa work really well to keep your brain not de-stressed, although that may be a part of it, but to protect your hippocampus so you can process those bad things so they don't get stuck, and then every time you get stressed out, lead to addictive impulse tendencies.
Dude, insane.
Yeah.
Well, man, we'll finish up the podcast here because we've been going on. I know we could keep going for ages. But, like, you're an absolute stud, man. Thank you for coming onto the show, sharing all your wisdom and everything like that. If everyone is listening, I hope you've taken out, like, some serious lessons. I know I'm going to be listening to this again, like, all the time. Just to get all those little, like, micro points out of there. So thanks so much, man. If there's anything you want to say, please let us know.
No, we've got 1 hour and you're going to jiu-jitsu with me.
Oh, the jiu-jitsu virginity is getting broken.
Yeah.
Oh god, I'm gonna get rolled.
We had a good time.
So where can people find you? Where can they reach out if they want to work to you?
Website musclenerds.net. We also have our gym as iopcgym.com.au. Where we don't do a lot on Facebook because nobody does anymore. Apparently that's for old people, which I'm old. But Instagram, musclenerds_health is the Instagram thing. And for any coaches that are looking for education or anybody looking for training and all that stuff, it's info@musclenerds.net if you have any inquiries for anything.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, man. And again, big love and look at the gains. I can't even move. I'm going to stand out of this chair in a second and fall down. All right. Thanks so much, man.